Mission Chats with John Crow.
Welcome back once again to Mission Chats. As always, I love being able to introduce you to someone new and a different organization here today that I'm excited about. As someone who's into tech stuff, this really resonates with me personally. And so I'm happy to introduce you to Heather Trumpfheller, and I'm going to let you share your story with us, how the Lord brought you to faith and how he's brought you to this part and this ministry that you have today.
Thanks, John. Yes, my name is Heather. I'm currently living in Austin, Texas, born and raised in Dallas. And really, I would say my faith story has been one from the very beginning. I grew up, in Dallas, Texas, in the Bible Belt. But a lot of my faith was more tied to perfectionism and legalism and being seen as, the good little girl and do the right thing. And I feel like that's been a huge trend in a lot of my life, but it's been a really beautiful journey of just finding my faith on my own now. I'm in my 30s and it's been a more of an unlearning season and adding back things of truth and his word in there for really just what God thinks about me. So if anyone who can relate in here, I grew up really just tying so much of my worthiness to achievements. And I had a lot of career pivots along the way as I was trying to redefine and measure success. I went from Dallas to University of Missouri for college. I studied broadcast journalism. I worked in NBC for 4 years as a reporter and an anchor, and really just saw people's worst days were my best stories. And I struggled with the compartmentalization of that. So then I pivoted to a public relations firm. And then I ultimately pivoted over to technology. And at the technology company, I was actually able to start our Christian Employee Resource Group there. And that was a beautiful way of bring whole self to work. And that is really, again, where my faith became a platform. And that's how I felt in high school. I led Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I prayed at my giant Dallas high school's baccalaureate. It was like this platform that faith gave me was always heavily tied to success and achievements and measuring my worthiness from productivity until the pandemic. Really, the pandemic, I always say, God didn't send it, but he used it. And he really used it to show me that my anxiety could be a weapon to be in proximity to the Lord through prayer and stillness, and surrender and obeying are actually places and ways of freedom, of just really getting aligned with him. And so as someone who would say grew up in the faith, I wouldn't say until the pandemic, I really looked at God and Jesus as a relationship versus just the religion side. And it's been a beautiful, like I said, unlearning part of my story. And just every year I've been surrendering more of a different area of my life to God. And just I've been praying for him to make things obvious. And I always say, be careful what you pray for, because God speaks.
Yeah, for sure.
So good.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, lovely to hear. Again, I always enjoy people's testimonies. I sometimes say this on my podcast, but I always find like there's little things you can connect to in anyone's story. And yeah, totally understand the perfectionism piece of the puzzle. That's been a bit of my life journey as well. And yeah, just realizing that God loves us regardless of what we accomplish or not. So it's exciting just to hear that in your life. And I know we chatted a couple of weeks ago, just kind of touching base initially. And I was super excited to hear, again, another pivot, I think, in your world from being in tech, in corporate America and tech side of things, but now kind of bringing, I think, probably all these skill sets in different ways with PR background into your current role. So yeah, I just want to invite you to share what you're doing today, what the organization is, what it's about. I'm super excited for people to learn about this.
Thanks, John. Yeah. And in my prayer, I had been at this tech consulting company for 11 years and I actually loved it. It was one of those things where nothing was wrong. And I think many of us who God called to the marketplace, it's sort of this balance between how do you look at your work as ministry and fulfillment, but also assigning the appropriate role and purpose to your job.
Right.
And I just, again, and this whole perfectionism was too interwoven. And I was praying for God to make it obvious, and really had this divine moment where He did. He interceded on a meeting. My director was like, hey, I think we need to reorg you. I'd been in my role for 7 years. And I literally was like, this is it. This is actually, I'm putting in my notice. And I didn't even know I was going into that meeting preparing to put in my notice after over a decade.
Yeah.
God's divine intervention was really through that. And so I always tell people I made with this platform that I'm about to talk about called Switchboard, what I essentially wish I would have had so that other people don't have to go quit their job to find purpose and find how they can play a role in a part of the Great Commission, because I felt like I was off the hook.
Yeah.
God called me to the marketplace. And so Switchboard is essentially a platform that connects believers with missionaries around your skill sets, your causes, and really the geographical regions that God is stirring in your heart.
Yeah.
So a graphic designer in Charlotte, North Carolina can get connected to a church plant in the Middle East or a nonprofit organization in Africa by helping them design parts of their webpage or their social media strategy. They could serve as sort of this polycentric mission team for these missionaries without having to uproot their life.
Yep.
But they can play that part in advancing the gospel. But it's also retaining them as an employee because, again, you assign purpose to your job.
Right.
And so if you're just getting up and going about your day, I used to always ask myself this, like, Heather, does your calendar and your bank account reflect your love of the Lord? And if you don't take ownership over that, they'll run your day.
Right.
And that's how my day was being run. And I was like, okay, if you can actually embed some sort of serving or using of your gifts that God, again, has equipped you with because he's called you to them, if you could use those, my employer is going to actually retain me better because I'm going to find more purpose at my work. Yep. I'm going to actually participate in advancing the gospel. And as a result, I'm going to see miracles happening because I'm open to a perspective shift and I'm seeing what God is doing and I'm getting out of my daily grind. And I think that's really what serving is such a beautiful thing is, one, you're building transferable skills, right? Which can be applicable on your career journey.
Right.
But two, it's also that perspective shift.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And like I said, I just love this whole concept of bringing skills you have to help what God's doing around the world through mission agencies and missionaries. And first glance, when I took a look at it, it did seem very tech, design, that sort of heavy, as it were. And I think that's where it's begun, but it's broadening beyond that. So I'd love to hear kind of how do you see that going forward? What sort of skills? Because I think people might be listening like, well, I'm not a web designer. I'm not a this or that. I'm not sure I can fit in. But I know, the goal is, I imagine, just about any skill set that could be useful. You'll be rolling things out along those lines. So.
Yeah. So a couple different things that I tell people is, first off, it's your skills and your schedule.
Right.
So many people are not serving because it doesn't fit within their calendar or their time constraints, or they really don't think they're serving the best capacity, right? If someone joins a church and they're going to the next steps and they learn, okay, I can serve on the worship team, or I can hang with the babies, or I can go to the food bank on a Saturday, but I actually work on Saturdays, or I have kids, or I have this, or I have a terrible singing voice.
Right.
How do I serve? So the people who are not serving are primarily because of time constraints, or you're unsure how your skills are relevant or will add value.
Right.
So first off, we want to remove that barrier and that way of thinking. It is your skills and your schedule. And secondly, when people think of missions, especially millennials and Gen Z, I would say, they think mission trips that are, I'm going somewhere to paint a fence or build a house, kind of because my parents said I needed some behavioral change, right? I feel like it was this reactive, like, go on a mission trip because you need to be more grateful. Like, that is I saw as mission trips.
Okay.
And so I think it's also a virtual mission trip is something that people can only now really visualize because of the pandemic, because of work from home movement, because of what the digital age has given us. You don't need a passport to go on a mission trip to get connected to someone. And I even think of the Uber example. If 10 years ago, I would have told you, hey, I'm going to fly to this city. I'm going to get into a car of a stranger that I pulled up on my phone, and I'm going to get there safely. And they actually don't even speak my language.
Right.
It would be like, call 911,
Yes.
mom your tracking information. And now it's the things we can do on our smartphones because of this connection. And, there's so many topics now about we're in a lonely epidemic and this crisis that because we're so well connected, it's actually easier to know someone, a missionary in the Middle East, than it is for me to go talk to my neighbor next door. This whole love your neighbor perspective has expanded because we are on our phones. But how can we use our phones and how can we use AI to actually advance the gospel and get people serving?
Right.
Because the people who work from home, maybe they want an in-person serving opportunity. But if you're in office all day, or if you're not someone who's working from home, how can you embed serving in areas that fit your lifestyle? And that's what we essentially want to do, is remove all the barriers that people, again, like myself a couple years ago, thought I was off the hook for having to advance the gospel.
Right.
And it's just not the case. But I was actually the one depriving myself of seeing the goodness and the great things that God was still doing.
Definitely.
Back to your question too of skill sets, right?
Yep.
So yes, we are an app, right? We're a web browsing based app. So if you go to globalswitchboard.io on your computer or your phone in a browser, you'll find us.
Right.
And everything is there. But we are not just technical skill sets. So just to provide a little bit of context, we also have a skills assessment on our app. And in 2 to 3 sentences, you tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal experience. Do you have kids? What is your family dynamic? What are your passions? Tell us about your professional skills, maybe what your degree was in or what you're doing for your day job, or really even what you're dabbling in.
Sure.
Where do you feel like God is stirring your heart, or what are you learning? And we've built out a tool with ChatGPT that actually immediately you'll get a tailored report emailed to you telling you 3 ways that your unique skills can be used to actually advance the gospel. And then we'll tie them to open roles that are on our platform.
Right.
So when you sign up as a volunteer for Switchboard, you'll make a tailored profile as well saying, okay, I'm a CPA. I can help a missionary with their tax return. I can help a church plant set up their budget process. I can help a nonprofit with their accounting system. But maybe I'm also raising a child with special needs.
Right.
And there is a missionary in Bangladesh who feels like they need to leave the field because they're unsure of how to navigate this new season of life with their family. And talking to you for an hour a month actually keeps them on the mission field.
Right. Yeah.
Or maybe you're a mom who in the pandemic wrote homeschool curriculum. And now you've got this incredible content. And there's a church plant in Brazil, and they feel like they can't be present to the people that God has called them to love because they have to homeschool their kids.
Right.
Well, maybe your curriculum that you've already written or that you're currently teaching can be a guide for them to stay again on this mission field.
Yep.
There's life skills like proofreading emails or websites for missionaries where English is not their first language.
Yeah.
Or copy editing, or I tell people all the time, like, okay, you want to learn web development or mobile app development. A great way to do so and pick up skills is from a serving capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you already have expertise in these things, like you love taking photos or social media.
Right.
Build TikTok reels for a nonprofit, but you don't have to quit your day job as a school principal to build TikToks for the nonprofit that are going to draw more people to pray and love on this charity. So it really is just such a beautiful way. And it's been really awesome because there's a church that I know here in Austin where they have a missionary that is sent from their church.
Okay.
And he went and started a business as mission. And he was running this coffee company that's actually spreading Jesus in a closed country. And he had some engineering type questions. Well, we actually got his church to ask their congregation, thanks for praying for him. Thank you for tithing for this missionary. But who actually knows how to do this? And it was an engineering specific question. There was someone in the congregation that was like, wow, I can actually help with that. And via FaceTime, he was able to set up this engineering system for the coffee to get distributed. And it was this beautiful thing that they've been working together, never having met in different time zones for a year. And this missionary just came back to Austin. We were able to have them sit down together for the first time and share that story.
Yeah.
It was just such a beautiful way to see God uniting generations, God uniting people that have never lived in the same place.
Right.
And really just telling the story of what God is doing, that, his skills that he's learned from this Western culture and this man's like love of the heart of the people, the language he's learned, he's adapted to living within them. He's not going to have the same skill set as some people in Western culture. But we've got volunteers and missionaries from all over the world on the platform, including people in these indigenous closed country regions who really just need help in some of these areas that, especially us here in America, like are second nature to us.
Right. And that's what I love too. I mean, I've served in missions myself as well. And I know so often we try to figure it out on our own because we are the people that have to make it happen, and I think that's historically often how it's been. But this to me is just so exciting because maybe we can have someone come alongside and, put the need we have in Switchboard and then have someone who's got that skill set come alongside and help make it happen, which again, I think, especially in a smaller organizational context, that then frees up the missionary to actually do what they went to do originally, right? They can go and use their time and their expertise in reaching out or in making relationships with the local folks or whatever it might be, rather than spending hours trying to figure out, well, how do I put a website together, or how do I blog, or even what I'm doing, how do I podcast, stuff like that, which, so that's just super exciting to see how that could work and is working. So that's wonderful.
And I'm currently reading John Mark Comer's book, Practicing the Way. And, he's really looking at the life of Jesus, not just the death of Jesus and all the goodness that we have from that, but really just respecting and modeling the way that Jesus lived. Jesus as the prototype.
Right.
And something he says in there that I keep thinking about is, we are each his body. And we say that, right? We're the body of Christ.
Right.
But really, when we come together, we can do far more than we are on our own. And so many missionaries and so many BAMs and nonprofits that are, advancing the gospel, they have to be experts in everything because financial reasons, or they're the only person, like them and their family are the only ones that moved to this region in Spain to do this, or whatever it might be, from resources or time or money. They have to become these experts. And God created us to be such communal beings. And there's so much that we can do if we each take that onus of, I am his hands and I am his body here on earth, but I only need to do my one portion. I don't need to do it all. Right. And that's how the missionaries are the same, but they have so much more responsibility to try to wear all these hats.
Yeah.
And that's what we essentially want to connect people around, that is share that load, right? And I had the opportunity to be at Luzon, every 15 years or so, theologian conference, essentially, where they bring, 5,000 believers from all over the world together. And it was such a perspective shock for me that, people are still being persecuted for their faith. And here I am in Texas, and I've known about Jesus my whole life, and I've never once been afraid of sharing my faith, but I'm, been more afraid of dying to my reputation, essentially, or the things that keep us from that. But Rick Warren at the conference was talking about, again, these polycentric mission teams that are actually uniting and healing people because we're bringing generations together. We're bringing these perspectives together. We're bringing people about, and people can take off the weight of this load that they're carrying and really looking at it as we're training. It's like a long time process of this advancing the gospel, but we're each just training in our own lane versus like, I need to make sure you start to finish come to know Christ. But no, it's planting seeds, it's harvesting. It's not like taking this one tree from seed all the way to bloom type of thing. And I think that's the thing, is we don't do it because we think there's so much weight that we have to carry. And so we look at the missionaries like, oh, good for them, I could never do that. But they want to share the load so that they can keep doing it and it becomes sustainable.
Yeah, no, that's great. And as I'm sitting here thinking back to days in working in mission agencies and, knowing that most of the time we're operating on a shoestring budget. And I think we've all had that experience, right, of finding an amazing app or an online service that, you get a week's free trial. And then it's like, whoa, how much are they charging a month kind of thing? So I think, what does that look like cost-wise?
Yeah, so 3 main guidelines on the platform are everyone's 18 years of age, just from a logistics perspective. Second is It is advancing the gospel. So if you're signing up to volunteer, we want you to be assured that you're not going to get connected to just a nonprofit. Like, you will be connected to someone who they are out doing Great Commission, faith-centric work.
Right.
They might not be able to be as public because maybe they're in a closed country, or maybe they don't necessarily have a website yet or so much of a digital footprint. But we at Switchboard are vetting that all of the organizations and all of the individuals on the platform are advancing the gospel. So rest assured for that. And same with our organizations. We're connecting you with someone who has signed a declaration of faith, that you understand that this is advancing the gospel. And third, it's entirely free. We are right now truly God provides funded from donors and grants and individuals, and it's been amazing. But we are entirely free. So organizations or missionaries, if you're listening to this, we genuinely mean there are no strings attached. We want you on the platform, and we want you to write what we call virtual roles or create a 1-hour request, because talking to an expert for 1 hour as a sounding board could truly change your trajectory of your mission. And so we want you on the platform, and it's entirely free. But what we just ask is you can make a fundraising strategy with someone, but don't fundraise on the platform, right? This is a skills-based dialogue versus funds. Also, the volunteers, if you're building a website for someone, you also can't send them an invoice because they're thanking you for this. And you're like, oh, I should just send them a Venmo request.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that either. So organizations, don't be afraid that you're going to get an invoice, but volunteers also don't be afraid that you're going to be asked to fund that missionary at the end of this. It really is just uniting the people around the skills. And we're really just the connector, right? So when you come on the platform, and maybe you check that you're an expert in SEO, proofreading, and parenting advice. You're not asking you to show me like how you raised your kid from 0 to 18 or how you most recently got your company top on SEO. We're not asking for some of these things. We are assuming that if you're putting down that you're expert or specialized in these areas, that you feel confident in that.
Right.
So more of our vetting does come from faith-based and what is the mission, where is the advancement of the gospel, and we are truly just that connector. And then we are hands-off. We're not measuring the deliverables. If you as a volunteer get connected to a missionary to build a website, don't be afraid. Heather's going to check in every 2 weeks and be like, hey, where's the website? What's the prototype look like? We are just that connector.
Yeah.
And as things evolve and change, that's where we want people to be able to step in and out, right? If maybe you're helping someone build a website and you get to the point where it's built and now they need someone to do the testing or the designing, you step out. That is when a different volunteer comes in around that skill set. We, again, are not trying to have people be experts in all things. We want to give everyone the opportunity to serve and to get connected to missionaries to see what Jesus is doing, not necessarily for you to be with them through fruition, right? It can be around certain skill sets.
No, that's awesome. Very exciting. And yeah, I know missionaries or organizations hearing that probably going to be just signing up in droves because, yeah, I know in my career, my experience, that would have been amazing to have access to experts in this way across the whole range of what you're offering now.
I've had missionaries actually reach out to me and say, I have 6 volunteers through Switchboard, right? My CPA is through Switchboard, my social media experts through Switchboard, my grant writers through Switchboard. The person who helps me write my homeschool curriculum is through Switchboard. Can I compensate these people? And really, the volunteers are feeling the win. I promise you.
Yeah.
And as a volunteer, I think that is where God tells us, like, test me in this love of money. Like, people think we're so money centric, especially here in the United States, right? Like, we think like, oh, the best way to thank them is to compensate them. No, it's actually the testimonies and the stories and the gratitude and inviting them in on that dream and sharing the success together. And so when we first started, we just had 1-hour consultations.
Okay.
So a missionary connected with an expert. Maybe they would ask them about messaging or a brand strategy. But then the volunteer would reach out to Switchboard a couple weeks later and they'd be like, well, I want to know what happened.
Right.
That's when we learned that we were like, oh, the best way to quote unquote pay these volunteers is actually invite them to see the success and the impact.
Right.
Actually see the gospel being advanced. So that's when we pivoted and we made these virtual roles, which are more of these ongoing, flexible based on your skills and your schedule, longer time commitment areas of serving because people wanted to see the fruit of that. And that's just truly been such a beautiful thing.
Very encouraging. And I know you've sort of hinted at a few stories already, which exciting to hear and see just how God's using this already. But yeah, I don't know if there's one particular one or one or two that you would love for our audience to hear how this is actually working.
Yeah, I think for me, the most convicting thing again has been the love thy neighbor rebrand, right? I think people think of it as, oh, I mow my elderly neighbor's lawn or I do this. And it's like, those are beautiful things. Like we love when people do those. And I know those in the immediacy, you sort of get that dopamine hit of, wow, I see the lawn mowed and now I feel better, right? And that's great. Like there's such a taboo, I feel like sometimes around serving. Like, is it selfish if I feel good at the end of it? And that's where, again, I think the power of the testimonies and the stories are what make this long term. And again, seeing the fruit bearing from that. But for example, I knew a missionary. He was actually based in the United States, but he was helping church plants in these closed countries and these unreached people groups. And for him, he told us that he was sitting down with some of his team and he was like, I had these dreams that were just in me, but I knew I couldn't do them. And they were like weighing on me. It's like sometimes when you know that God has put something on your heart, but you genuinely cannot fathom it.
Right.
And so he knew what he wanted to do. And he had these lofty goals of these unreached people groups that he wanted to get into. And he had no idea how to go about that. And we told him, we were like, if you just get on Switchboard, I promise, maybe you just do a brainstorming session with someone. If you externally process it with someone, maybe you'll be able to actually see a little bit more of the calls to action in the next step. So he gets connected with this consultant, right? She works in consulting at one of the big five, gets connected to him. He just like dream dumps on her, essentially, these things that have just been on his heart. Yeah. And she tells him, I'm actually retiring on Friday after my career here for 45 years. And I would like to project manage these things for you. And literally he was like, oh, I truly just wanted a sounding board. Like I just externally processed with someone. And she was like, no, I have been praying for how God was going to make me feel relevant once I retire. But I feel called to retire. But I want to stay relevant and I want to stay connected and I want to still be around people. And that's what she said is she was like, this would be an answered prayer for me. And so it started off as, okay, I'll just look at some of your project documentations and add some guidance. And then it turned into her actually project managing some of these stories. And now when we last checked in with her, she's like, oh yeah, I'm spending like 20 hours a week with this missionary. And it's by choice. It's amazing. It's this fruit. And so I think, again, a lot of people think, oh, maybe I'm retired and I'm not super tech savvy. How would Switchboard be relevant to me? And it's like, yes, we might be using technology for the connection, but there are people in various different seasons of their lives who are just trying to find relevancy and feel impactful. And that's what we want to create for people. And so again, I think what can start as really just a 1-hour conversation as a sounding board can actually turn into tangible things that are being done to advance the gospel. So just an easy story. There are so many, right? Like we have this one missionary where she's helping women who have been trafficked. And that's what she said is she was like, I really just want to be here loving on the women. Yeah. And one of the things is they're building, artisanal goods. Okay. And she wants to sell them. And she was like, but I need to have social media presence. But here in the country that I'm at, social media is regulated and all of these things. And we had her take a 1-hour call with someone who does social media for a large company. And they were like, wow, I can actually set up some systems for you. And now this woman is getting to love on these women and children. The goods are being sold and then someone is able to see that, right? So again, something so simple that we do all day, for myself included, is spend time on Instagram. You're saying that I could actually help a missionary continue to love people who have been trafficked, who now are finding Jesus, who are now being healed and restored, both physically and mentally, because of my time on the gram. Like, what a gift.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I love that. Even just thinking, it kind of takes the whole, let's call it spectrum of life, right? It could be brand new graphic designer, just kind of they've studied, but they're trying to get a little more experience, trying to build up the portfolio. This amazing
Yeah.
opportunity, right? And then, like you just share on the other end of things, you've spent 45 years in a career. You're clearly an expert. And it's like, what do I do with this now, Lord? And yeah, just so amazing to see how that could work. So that's
Yeah.
just really encouraging to consider that and think through how that could work for just about anyone who has a skill set. And we all have a skill set, right? Whatever it might be, there's something we can offer someone else. And that's amazing.
I actually just spoke at University of Texas's business school. And I was telling some of them that I'm like, okay, you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your career. And I was telling them a little bit of the analogy of, when you check your phone and you see that Amazon is 3 stops away with your package, you get excited, right? You're not like, oh, Amazon, why did you not come to my house first? But you're thinking, like, Amazon's in the neighborhood. And I think the same thing about tell this to younger people when they're getting a job. Like when you're watching your friends get a job and maybe you're a senior, like think like God's in the neighborhood. Like your stop is 3 stops away kind of analogy. And so I tell people that too. Serving is such a beautiful way, like you said, to get some skills that you can present as real life experience in an interview.
Right.
I also spoke at a job seekers network where it was a bunch of people who honestly felt like they needed to upskill in their career, that they were jobs that were not necessarily super relevant anymore because of technology.
Right.
And we actually have some roles on our platform where someone will train you on that skill. Like, for example, they need someone to maintain a mobile app.
Mhm.
And they're like, okay, I will teach you in an hour or two how to do this. And then I just need to pass that off to you. This person now learned how to do this mobile app that they put on their resume that they were then able to upskill at their career.
Right.
And so it really is such a productive way too of creating transferable skills, learning new skills, or even things that you are passionate about and want to dabble in, but God did not call you to do professionally. And sometimes that's why they're hobbies, right? Because we don't want to remove the fun and the joy out of them by giving them too much ownership in our life, too much of like the pressure of compensation. Like serving is a beautiful way to do that. And so I agree. Like if there are people there's a skill you want to learn or you're starting your business or want to create a portfolio, this is a great way to start having real life experience that you can actually showcase in an interview. But also, you're right. If you're retiring, it's a great way that maybe you split between your 2 kids in Denver and Dallas. And so you have a hard time serving in your local church because you can't be an usher when you're in 2 different cities, but you could serve on the platform virtually. But also, again, like if you're a professional and you're 20 years into your career and you feel like you're not finding purpose, well, assign purpose to your job in such a different way. And I promise your employer will retain you because you're going to be more impactful.
Right. Yeah, and you might even find in certain cases your employer might encourage you to take some of your work hours because you're learning a skill or using a skill for something good. Then everyone's a winner in that case. So that's awesome.
That's such a good point, John. Yeah, so I definitely encourage you, if you're a missionary or you're a church plant or you're a nonprofit leader, get on our platform. I truly mean that. Globalswitchboard.io. We call it a Great Commission organization. And if you're a believer, I encourage you, right? We have people on the platform who are both parties. They're a Great Commission organization and they're a kingdom consultant because they look at it as, I'm receiving support from Switchboard in these areas, but I'm also now an expert in starting a nonprofit in the UK and I want to be able to pay it forward in that. And we've got our skill assessment. So if you're still thinking, okay, I'm not sure how I'd be relevant, we have a skill assessment on our platform. And then we also have a virtual mission kit. And it's essentially a one-stop guide for missions pastors or churches to be able to include their whole congregations in missions. And it's vague enough that we can tailor it to your church, right? Maybe it's embedding this into your next steps. Or if you already have missionaries or outreach partners that your church is tithing and praying for, this is a way to connect your congregation based on their skills. Because I tell pastors all the time, you might know the pulse and the heartbeat of your church, but you don't know how many people speak Spanish in your congregation or how many CPAs you have. That's where it's like, let's offset that to Switchboard. We don't want to add anything to our pastor's plate. We actually want to take off some of this from their plate and allow another opportunity for people to serve. So check out our virtual missions kit on the platform, our skill assessment, sign up to serve, sign up to receive support, and really just, again, find your role in God's global story.
Amen. So spot on. Yeah. And I think a great challenge for anyone listening to this, anyone hearing this, definitely go and check it out. If nothing else, see what type of skills are being looked for, get the assessment, get the information, figure out how you could plug in. Very exciting stuff. Now, obviously, I often ask my guests how you would describe missions. And I think you've described it over these past minutes that we've been chatting here. But if there's anything you want to add to that?
I would say missions does not tie to a geographic location.
Yeah.
And I think that is a common misconception. So wherever you are in the world, you too can play a part in advancing the gospel.
For sure. And something, stepping back, bigger picture, missions today, there's a lot of talk about the global south and kind of missionaries coming from the nations that we've always, maybe us in the West, have thought of where the missionaries need to be going from the West to make it work. Of course, that's no longer the case. And I think something I'm really excited to consider in this is, someone, from the global south hasn't had the opportunity to learn whatever the skill set might be that they need, and being able to connect to someone, let's say from the West, from the US, maybe. I mean, I know there's plenty of people with amazing skills all around the world, so it's not that the people volunteering have to be from a Western country, but I think it's a neat way for folks from the West to still have a meaningful role in world missions. And the reality is a lot of us, maybe we can afford to pack up and go overseas somewhere. But in reality, the efficiency of doing mission work as a Westerner in, let's say, the Middle East or in, nations in Africa or something may not be the most effective way to do it anymore. And so I think that's, just a really encouraging thought as well, that there's still a place for everyone in missions, whether it's, front line doing it or, let's call it back office, supporting it. And I'm sure you're seeing all that kind of thing happening day by day as you engage and get more people on the platform.
Absolutely. And, there was a recent survey that found that 2% of people had been on a short-term mission trip, right? And majority had gone as teenagers.
Right.
And only one in every 175,000 Christians goes on to be a missionary.
Right.
So I think a lot of people think like, oh, I can pass off that responsibility to someone else, but everyone had that mentality, and that's increasing the sharp decline. So again, trying to show people to think differently. Things often scare us when they're unknown. Again, Uber would have been terrifying 10 years ago, and now I use it every single day. And I know a lot of people who don't even have cars because they rely on that. And I think that's essentially what it is. We're trying to fill these gaps where we're seeing these sharp decline. Yes, what it looks like to play a part in the Great Commission has changed, but the Great Commission has not changed.
Amen.
That is still a responsibility we have, and we need to play our part.
Yeah. And I think Switchboard just provides such an amazing way to do that. So Heather, thank you so much for taking time today and just sharing. I think the basic advice I'm hearing is, why aren't you checking it out right now and signing up and sharing some skill set the Lord's given you? I don't know if you want to add any final thoughts before we wrap up today.
Everyone has their own individual testimony and story and impact, and we're here to support you. Check us out on our website, but truly hit me up if you have any questions, and I'd love to figure out how we can get you plugged in as an organization, as a volunteer on the platform, as a church partner. Just excited to collaborate.
Yeah, for sure. And even if someone's listening here who has the financial means to help make this happen, I'm sure you'd love to hear from them too. They can reach out and see how they could help support it so that it can remain a free service for people serving the Great Commission.
Absolutely. We've got a give page on our site. And if you've got expertise that you also think that we would benefit from, please let us know. I mean, we're a brand new startup that just came from needs of this, and it's been a beautiful journey, but we would love to have your expertise from Switchboard as well. So
For sure. Yeah, I'm just excited to see what this may generate as far as help. And I've got a mission network myself, and I would love to see some of those on the front lines, let's say, who need help learning about this and actually being able to meet some of those needs. Even like you were saying earlier, maybe it's a way for something that they've had a vision for years and just haven't had capacity or skill set to make it happen. And this might be the way to open that that door and further expand, the reach of what they're doing in ministry. So this has been so much fun. Thank you for carving the time out, and yeah, super exciting. And thank you so much once again for being here.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you're as excited as I am about what you've just heard. And I think it's an amazing thing that you have a skill set that could help accelerate the Great Commission. So my challenge to you right now is get on your computer or your phone, load up globalswitchboard.io, have a look around, see a little bit more what it's about, and then take that assessment and see how you could plug in to making the Great Commission move forward quicker. Thank you so much for listening to Mission Chats, and I'll look forward to introducing you to my next guest.
Find us online at missionchats.com